July 13th, 2013. Okay, we'll start with the homage to the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Good morning, everybody. Okay, so today marks a big transition for us because now we're starting on what's called the Upari Panasa. That means the final 50 suttas of the Majjhima Nikaya. This is the third division of the Majjhima Nikaya, the third and last division. So we've gone through two big milestones already, completing the first 50. Now we've completed the second 50, not taking every sutta, of course, but the most important ones. And now we come into the third 50. And this sutta is called Devadaha. I have to apologize, by the way, that you're not in the announcement. It didn't mention the sutta that we'll be studying today, because a new person has taken over the job of sending out the notices, and I was away this past week, so I didn't have access to email, so I couldn't inform her. So she sent out the announcement on Thursday, but hadn't sent out the announcement early this morning or recorded the phone message until I went for breakfast, and I conveyed the message to her at breakfast. But I'll see that this is done regularly in the future. Okay, so now we are taking sutta number 101. This is called Devadaha Sutta. It's named simply after the place where it occurs. Okay, so this sutta takes place when the Buddha was living in his own native land, the Sakyan country, at a town called Devadaha. And so now the Buddha is addressing the monks, and he's going to recollect some past encounter that he had. Okay, so he begins by saying that there are some recluses and Brahmins who hold this view, that whatever a person feels, whether pleasure, pain, or neither painful nor pleasant feeling, all that is caused by what was done in the past. It's, in other words, is all caused by past karma. Whatever one experiences, if one experiences pleasant feeling in the present, that's caused by past karma. If one feels painful feeling in the present, that's caused by past karma. And if one is just feeling just the neutral and different feelings, that is also caused by past karma. And so the view that's being enunciated here is the view that, if we jump to the end of the paragraph, that this is the view expressed by what the Buddhist texts call the Nigantas. The word Niganta means the ones without any bonds, without any ties or knots. And the Nigantas are what we know historically as the Jains, the Jainas. And the Jains were a school of Indian thought and practice contemporary with the Buddha. In fact, probably the Jains go back even long before the time of the Buddha. So the Jains could have been a school of Indian spirituality that comes from a very, very early period. It might have been, the Jains might even have been the descendants of the kind of spirituality that was practiced before the Aryan invasion of India. The Jains themselves speak of having 24 great spiritual masters before the time of the Buddha, and they call their spiritual masters Tirthankaras, which means builders of fords. Not Ford, not automobiles, not the Ford car, but this is a Ford. You know, I don't think we use this word very much in contemporary English, but because we have bridges now. But the ford is a place where, in ancient India, where they would cross the river. You know, a river would be flowing over a long distance, and you have to have places to cross the river. And so where the two banks come fairly close together, and the flow of the river is not so deep, that would be a ford, a place for crossing the river. So in Pali, we speak of it as Tita, in Sanskrit as Tirtha. You even have this in singular tota, like Katukastota? Is that correct? Ambalantota? Is there such a place? So all of that is just, tota is just a singular derivative of Tirtha or Tita. Okay, so the Jains ascribe their teaching. They say that they have 24 Tirthankaras, ford makers, ford builders, who are supposed to be like the great teachers of Jainism. And whether all of these are historical, that is a matter of doubt. It could be just a legendary number. But the historical great teacher of Jainism is a person who is often mentioned in the Buddhist texts, and his name is, he's referred to in the Buddhist texts as the Niganta Nataputta. Niganta is the general word for the Jain ascetic, and his name is given as Nataputta, or sometimes Nyataputta. There are different spellings of it. But he is known historically as sometimes he's referred to by his own devotees, the followers of Jainism, as Mahavira, which means the great hero. And he's also referred to as the Jina, the victorious one, the conqueror. And so for this reason, the followers of the Jina come to be known as Jaina, just like the followers of the Buddha come to be known as Bauddha, or sometimes as Saugata, based on the word Sugata. And Mahavira, the Jina, was a contemporary of the Buddha, probably a little bit older than the Buddha. He died earlier than the Buddha did because the Buddha's texts have record the Buddhist monks and the Buddha discussing the death of Mahavira. And he also taught in just about the same part of India where the Buddha taught, basically in the northeast of India. And yet there's no record in the texts of a direct face-to-face meeting between the Buddha and Mahavira. It would have been like a really interesting meeting. But we see that the Buddha encounters the Jain ascetics and has discussions with them. And sometimes, it's possible that the Buddhist monks would have encountered the Mahavira and had discussions with him. But we don't see any record of a direct face-to-face discussion between the Buddha and Mahavira. And what's interesting is that there are so many similarities between Buddhism and Jainism, certain fundamental differences, but certain similarities. Okay, I'll give you a crash course in Jainism. Or at least some of the basic fundamentals, because we'll see that this representation of the Jain position in this sutta is actually fairly accurate. Okay, the basic thesis of Jainism, or sort of maybe we call this the starting point for Jainism, is a distinction between what they call the jiva, which is the soul or life principle, and everything which is not alive, which is called ajiva, not living entities. And so the core of the person, or the core of all living beings, the center, the heart of all living beings, is the jiva, the soul, the innermost spiritual entity of the person. And through beginningless time, according to Jainism, the jiva, the living entity, has been mixed or mingled with non-living reality. We call matter in a very broad sense. The jiva in itself, in its own nature, is said to have 4 characteristics. That is, it has infinite knowledge, boundless knowledge, boundless perception, infinite perception, infinite bliss, and infinite power. But because the jiva has been bound up with matter, immersed in matter, so its infinite knowledge, perception, bliss, and power have been concealed or appear to be lost. The jiva becomes contaminated by its association with non-living substance. And according to Jainism, the jivas, the souls, transmigrate from life to life. And this process of transmigration has been going on, according to Jainism, through beginningless time. So you could say this is very similar to Buddhism, except that Buddha doesn't accept the idea of a jiva or a soul. But a process of beginningless transmigration has been taking place. And according to Jainism, the universe or the cosmos itself is without any beginning. So Jainism does not accept the idea of a creator God. There are many different realms of existence. There are realms of devas or deities, but none of them are a creator God. The devas too are living beings who have their own jivas which pass away from the deva world and take rebirth elsewhere and move on from life to life. Did you have a question, Michael?
There's such a strong similarity here as to make this Gnostic.
To make this?
This is a perfect description of Gnostic faith. Your description of the faith of the Jivas or the Jains is essentially Gnostic. And
similar to Gnosticism, you mean?
Not just similar, but almost identical. And Gnosticism has been said to have originated in Persia and was opened up to the East and the West by Alexander the Great in 324, 325 BC.
Mm-hmm.
So this is fascinating to me. I'm wondering if you see anything there.
I have to admit I don't know that much about Gnosticism, but I believe that according to Gnosticism, the world does have a creation, but it was created by a demiurge who was like an evil deity. So the world is considered, well, essentially fallen or evil.
Well, that would be the contamination side, but the pure essence of being, that is to say the soul, for want of a better word, is non-created and eternal in the same sense that you describe it as having been infinitely eternal as opposed to the creation. It's fascinating to me, and I'm just wondering if there's any historical connection here that we can make.
Of course, there could be flow of ideas back in, from India through Persia to Greece, and then actually Gnosticism was floating around in the area of the Middle East, beyond Persia to Syria, what's now Syria, Lebanon, Palestine. So the ideas were there, and then they picked up elements from Christianity and they molded a Gnostic form of Christianity, which was condemned by the Orthodox Church, the Orthodox Christian Church. Okay, now an important point in Jain teaching is that the jivas are multiple and distinct individual. And this is where Jainism differs from Vedanta, or at least from Advaita Vedanta, the school of non-dualism derived from the Upanishads, which teach that there is a multiplicity of individual souls, but at the core of all of these souls, there is the one Paramatman, the one Supreme Self. And so we are all, this is according to Advaita Vedanta, we are all essentially identical with that one Supreme Self. And just our individual existence is an illusion due to Maya, the world illusion superimposed upon the one infinite universal reality. Jainism doesn't accept this idea of one universal self, but holds that there is a multiplicity of individual selves, which even in the state of liberation retain their individuality. Okay, and so the jivas, or souls, according to Jainism, are multiple and distinct. And what sort of determines their individuality, their individual destiny, the characteristics, the life experiences, is their karma. But karma, according to Jainism, is interpreted quite differently from in Buddhism. The Buddha teaches that karma is volition, volitional action. But Jainism teaches that karma is a kind of material substance that adheres to the soul and sort of covers it over, just the way you might have mud flowing into a clean lake, and then the mud will contaminate the clear water of the lake. And so you have the mud mixed together with the pure water, contaminating the pure water. And so karma is a kind of material substance which is created by our actions. But it's a material substance which adheres to the soul, covers it over, and determines the migrations or reincarnations of the soul. And the process by which the karma flows into the soul and covers it over and contaminates it is called, well, they use the Sanskrit word the word is ashrava, which comes from a root shru, which means to flow, and the prefix a. Does the word look familiar? Anybody see any? Does it have any resonances? Exactly. It's in Pali, it's asava. And so you could see that the Buddha took quite a bit of his vocabulary or terminology from words, terms, ideas that were floating around in the Indian spiritual scene of his time. But he took these terms and often gave them a different meaning. So in Buddhism, asava refers to certain very fundamental defilements, say the defilements that are seen as flowing into the mind and sort of corrupting the mind and keeping it in bondage to the cycle of birth and death. But in Jainism, ashrava refers to the flowing in of corrupting karmic material into the jiva. And then what creates this karma is our passions or defilements. And so according to Jainism, there is a process by which the passions, I think they might use the word klesha. I would have to check on that. Okay, so the passions lead to the creation of karma. Karma as actions that create this material karma that flows into the soul and contaminates it. And then the karma is conceived of not only as a kind of material substance, but it's compared to seeds which have the potential to ripen and create, well, they create individual existence, the individual forms we take as we transmigrate from life to life. And then the karma also matures or ripens in the form of particular experiences, pleasant experiences and painful experiences, or neutral experiences. And then these pleasant experiences and painful experiences will trigger more passions, creating a kind of vicious cycle. And what are the primary passions of which the Jains speak? Raga. Again, they use Sanskrit. Dvesha. And moha. So raga is attachment or lust. Dvesha is the same as the Pali dosa, which means hatred or aversion. And moha is kind of dull indifference or delusion. And so this is what keeps us in bondage, these passions. And so the aim of Jainism is to break free from the cycle of birth and death, to liberate the jiva, so that the jiva, the soul, shines forth in its intrinsic purity and enters with the ending of the cycle of birth and death. The jiva enters the final goal of Jainism, which is called Moksha. Or nirvana. So if somebody comes into the classroom just now, like you just arrived, and looks on the blackboard, they'll think, Bhante is just giving a quick rundown of the fundamentals of Buddhism, right? But I've been explaining the Jain position of Jainism. Okay, thank you. Okay, so the aim of Jainism is to break free from the cycle of rebirth by destroying karma and the defilements, and thereby winning moksha or nirvana, in which the bondage of the soul, the jiva, to matter is broken, and the soul is emancipated into its own intrinsic nature and remains in a kind of unconditioned realm. Maybe this is the way they understand nirvana. It remains in an unconditioned realm, sort of shining in its own infinite knowledge, infinite perception, infinite bliss and infinite power. Okay, so this much seems quite similar to Buddhism. Now the difference comes in the way the Jains approach the task of liberation. For the Jains, what keeps or at least, even in the theoretical part, there's the major difference in that the Jains have the doctrine of the jiva, the individual self or soul, whereas the Buddha rejects that. But in the practical discipline, this is where we start to see quite significant differences in that for the Jains, the task, since it's karma that keeps us, that weighs down the soul and contaminates the soul, and karma is a kind of material substance adhering to the soul. So for the Jains, main part of their spiritual discipline is to destroy the old karma, to eradicate the old karma. And this is done by ascetic practices. So the way the Jains look at it, that as long as the karma adheres to the soul, this karma will eventually have to ripen. And that will keep the soul in bondage to birth and death, to samsara. And so in order to liberate the soul, what has to be done is to burn up the old karma, or to wear it away. And this wearing away, the Jains have a special term which the Buddha sometimes used in his own teaching, especially when he's speaking to followers of Jainism. And this word is nirjara. It must be related to the word jara, which means old age. Because when one grows old, what happens is that the body becomes worn out. But nirjara means the wearing away of the karma that's contaminating the soul. And the way that the karma is worn out is by these strong ascetic practices. So that the Jains are well known for such practices as reducing the intake of food, long fasts, applying pain, inflicting pain on the body, doing these exercises like squatting for long periods of time or standing for long periods of time. And in fact, they go, at least one of the sects of Jainism goes completely naked. The other sect of Jainism wear white robes. So I think because the Digambara, the sky-clad Jains, they go completely naked. So it might have been a bit difficult to propagate Jainism outside India. Like a group of Jains in America invite some of their ascetics to come to America to set up a Jain temple. have to hire a special plane for them and set up curtains running through the airport to get them onto the plane. And then when they disembark, coming out into the Kennedy Airport, Everybody will be looking around. Who are these guys? Okay, so they go, at least some of them go naked. And the sort of supreme practice for the Jains is to completely abstain from food until one dies. That's regarded as sort of the cream of the practices for the Jains. So naturally only few undertake that kind of practice. And so the purpose of the ascetic practice is to wear away, it's a way of hastening the maturation of the karma. Instead of waiting for it to mature from life to life over the long extent of samsara, one burns it up quickly by the ascetic practices. But the Jains also have the practice of meditation, which has the purpose of stilling the passions, because it's really what creates the karma is the attraction or lust for pleasure and the aversion or repulsion towards pain. And so the practice of Jain meditation has the purpose of developing equanimity towards pleasure and pain. Okay, another very important practice for the Jains, which also was incorporated into Buddhism, though it also could have an independent development in Buddhism, but the terminology is the same, and that is Ahimsa, which means harmlessness. Because according to to the Jains, the kind of action that generates the heaviest and darkest karma is violence or harmfulness towards other living beings. And so the Jains place a great deal of emphasis on non-harming, not harming by bodily action, by speech, and by thought. And according to Jain, this is where there's a difference between Buddhism and Jainism. According to Buddhism, what creates karma is the intention or volition. Whereas according to the Jains, karma can be created even by non-intentional action. So if we're walking down a path, being moderately careful, but unintentionally we step on an ant or some other bug, according to the Buddha, there's no karma of taking life created, because we had no intention of taking life. But according to the Jains, that would create some kind of negative karma. And so the Jains are extremely scrupulous about all of aspects of their behavior to avoid, the Jain ascetics are extremely scrupulous not to inflict any harm on living beings. So the Jain ascetics, or at least some of them, they wear a cloth over the mouth so that they don't accidentally breathe in little insects. And they carry a broom when they walk on the path so that they could brush the path in front of them to wipe away the ants and little insects. And the Jains, I believe, the Jain lay people, householders, at least in the mainstream, don't work at agriculture, because in agriculture you accidentally kill living beings or unintentionally kill living beings when you plow the soil or harvest the crops. So for this reason, the Jain community in India, which still exists today, are extremely capable business people. I think in Bombay, in some of the major Indian cities, in Gujarat especially, the Jains are a very, very prominent part of the business community. And the Jain theory of truth They call this anekarta. It's a theory of, how to put this, multiple aspects of truth. So it's a very, very open, flexible, comprehensive theory of truth, according to which one can make statements which seem to be contradictory, but are true from different points of view. And so Jainism has been able to accommodate a great variety of opinions, a great diversity of opinions. And it's become an extremely tolerant religion, at least in theory. I don't know in practice. And for this reason, some of the major book publishers in India today, book publishing companies, are run by Jain families. Because the Jains have a very, very tolerant attitude towards the multiplicity of religions in India. So if you know of Motilal Banarsidass,